Welcome to the Hindi Daily.
Our mission today is to cut through the noise and deliver a cross-section of today's most important analysis.
We'll be looking at everything from major policy reforms and shifting global power dynamics to structural economics and some groundbreaking conservation science.
We want you to walk away feeling thoroughly, quickly, and confidently informed about the facts that matter most.
Okay, let's unpack this new rural policy right away. The president has assented to the Viksit Bharat guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Gramin 2025.
Which, thankfully, has a much shorter name, the VBG-RAM-G Act.
And it's a really significant piece of legislation. It's all about livelihood guarantees in rural India.
And the headline change you need to know is immediate. The statutory wage employment guarantee, it's been expanded.
From what to what?
It's moving from 100 days of guaranteed work for rural households up to 125 days.
So that's the core of this enhanced livelihood guarantee.
It is, but what's fascinating here is how the editorial immediately tackles what it calls a central misreading of the act.
Right. Some critics were assuming that this expansion was maybe a cover for fiscal withdrawal or that it somehow weakens the guarantee structure.
Exactly. And the editorial counters that this is based on, well, a deeper conceptual error.
Which is?
The assumption that welfare and development are opposing choices. You know, that you can have one or the other.
And this new framework rejects that.
Fundamentally, it treats welfare, the enhanced livelihood, and development creating durable infrastructure as mutually reinforcing.
So they're not a trade-off. They're meant to work together.
On a continuum. That's the idea. The legal right to work isn't just preserved, it's functionally strengthened.
So beyond the extra 25 days, what else strengthens it?
Well, just as importantly, the Act removes those tricky procedural disentitlement clauses.
Ah, the ones that often ended up nullifying the unemployment allowance in practice.
Precisely. You couple that with reinforced time-bound grievance redressal, and you're closing the gap between the promise on paper and the worker's actual experience.
But there has been that critique about centralizing power, that this is moving toward top-down planning. What about the role of the gram panchayats?
That concern, according to the piece, rests on a false binary.
How so?
The demand for work still originates from the workers themselves. The core architecture remains local.
So the gram panchayats are still the primary planning and implementing bodies.
They are, and the gram sabhas, the village assemblies, still have approval powers. What the Act centralizes is coherence.
Coherence, so just joining up the dots.
Yes, they aggregate the local plans into these Viksit Gram Panchayat plans to get a national picture. It corrects the fragmentation that plagued the old scheme without taking away local decision-making authority.
And crucially, the money backs this up. The central fund allocation is actually increasing.
It is. It's going up from about 86,000 crore to nearly 95,000 crore rupees.
And that commitment is visible.
Plus, they're keeping that established 60.4 funding model, 60% for labor, 40% for material. But with an equity component for places like the Himalayan and Northeastern states,
which get a 90.10 view ratio.
Right. It's a reinforced support structure.
And we do need to touch on the history, because this reform addresses some pretty critical structural weaknesses.
Absolutely. The 2013 CAG report was staggering. It highlighted widespread mismanagement, including over 4.33 lakh fake or defective job cards.
Just think about that volume of fraud.
And worse, the scheme was failing in the heartland. Key states like Bihar, UP, and Maharashtra were only using about 20% of the funds they were allocated.
So this reform is really an institutional attempt to make sure the money and the guarantee actually get to the people who need it.
That's the goal.
Okay, moving from domestic policy to global currents, let's talk about Pakistan. The American scholar Stephen P. Cohen had that really critical analogy.
That Pakistan often negotiates by putting a gun to its own head.
Meaning its success comes not from stability, but from leveraging its own crises.
And that seems to be the current playbook. The recent diplomatic victories for Pakistan are less about some grand design and more about capitalizing on global geopolitical churns.
And this has provided some major narrative wins for Field Marshal Asim Munir, the army chief.
He's had some quick, high-profile successes, being called my favorite field marshal by former U.S. President Trump.
But the really substantive victory that the source details is the signing of that Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement with Saudi Arabia.
Yes, the SMDA in September 2025. That's the key marker of a shift in the Gulf's perspective.
So despite Pakistan's internal chaos, a stable Pakistan is suddenly consequential for them.
Very. Gulf powers now highly value its military strength and its potential utility.
And by utility, you mean?
Specifically, its potential to supply a large number of disciplined personnel, maybe for an international peace force in Gaza, if one is needed.
That view seems to be driven by a huge change in regional security perceptions. The Gaza war and Israel's widening military campaigns have clearly rattled the region.
Absolutely. The tipping point seems to have been that Israeli missile strike in Doha, in Qatar, back in September 2025 that killed a Qatari official.
And that incident solidified the push among Arab states for collective defense idea.
Exactly. They're anticipating a future where U.S. aid might be withdrawn or just not enough. And in that scenario, Pakistan's military capacity becomes a major asset.
But contrast this with just a few years ago. Riyadh was offering only conditional bailouts. Pakistan was sidelined at the OIC.
It's a stark contrast. This is the definition of exploiting regional instability.
So the critical takeaway here is that Munir has been skilled at using these strategic crevasses.
But it is pure opportunism. The country's core economic and political crises, they haven't gone anywhere. These narrative victories have a limited shelf life.
The gun is proverbially still there.
It is.
We shift now to a fascinating opinion piece on history, culture, and politics. The controversy around the national song, Vande Mataram.
This came up again during a recent parliamentary debate for the song's 150th anniversary.
And the piece really reminds us how political debates can obscure historical facts.
You really have to go back to the sources, like Sabyasachi Pataria's biography, to understand the context of the compromise that was made decades ago.
So why were only the first two stanzas adopted as the national song? What was the root of it all?
It was a very conscious choice made for the sake of unity. Some Muslim leaders in the 1930s strongly objected to later sections of the song.
On what grounds?
They viewed them as idolatrous. The worship of Mother Earth, or the motherland in that way, conflicted with Puritan Islamic faith, which reserves worship for Allah alone.
And key national figures at the time actually endorsed this compromise.
They did. Rabindranath Tagore conceded that the full poem is liable to be interpreted in ways that might wound Muslim susceptibilities.
Even Mahatma Gandhi, who loved the song, advised against singing it in full, saying, "Now we have fallen on evil days."
And that history is still highly relevant. In the recent debate, Muslim MPs invoked Article 25 of the Constitution.
The freedom to practice one's faith.
Exactly. They are protecting a constitutionally protected right when they object to the full song being enforced.
And here is the great historical irony that the piece points out.
Go on.
Bankim Chatterjee himself, the author, argued against idolatry in an essay in 1874. He called it anti-science.
So the main theological objection actually contradicted the author's own philosophical stance.
It's a complex historical web. But despite that, the desire to sing the song in full has unfortunately become a
litmus test of Indian nationalism.
Right. And the piece argues that Indian nationalism is far older and more robust than any single song.
But the debate clearly shows the deep political implications this issue still holds.
Now we dive into science and conservation, focusing on the urgent situation for rhinos.
Fewer than 28,000 remain globally, and what stands out immediately is the staggering failure of conventional methods.
You're talking about Greater Kruger, where they lost almost 2,000 rhinos between 2017 and 2023.
And they did that despite spending a massive $74 million on traditional anti-poaching.
$74 million. That tells you that just throwing money at the problem isn't working.
Well, the incentive for poaching is just too high. Rhino horn is just keratin, the same stuff as your fingernails. But the black market values it in the hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars.
All for status symbols and so-called traditional medicine with no scientific backing.
None whatsoever, which is why this new study in science is such a breakthrough. It shows a simple, cheap act is what truly works.
They found that strategically dehorning 2,284 rhinos across 8 reserves led to a fate.
A dramatic 78% drop in poaching incidents.
78%.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the crucial insight, right? The cost.
This intervention used only 1.2% of that total anti-poaching budget.
1.2%. The data is definitive.
Dehorned rhinos faced a remarkable 95% lower risk of being poached. You just completely remove the economic incentive.
And for anyone listening, we should clarify the dehorning procedure. It's done safely.
Oh, absolutely. It's done by conservationists under sedation. The animal is blindfolded, given earplugs, and they carefully cut the horn above the germinal layer.
Which is vital because it allows the horn to regrow without harming the animal.
A world away from poachers who kill quickly for the entire horn.
And this data also raises an important question about systemic governance, doesn't it?
It does. The study found that efforts focused just on detection and arrest were less effective. The researchers suggest that systemic corruption and weak justice systems allow traffickers to exploit loopholes.
Which highlights that successful conservation is about more than just spending or biology.
Right. Contrast this with Kaziranga National Park in India and Nepal. They've had huge success, losing only 1 or 2 rhinos recently.
And not through dehorning.
No, through smart patrolling and active community engagement. It just underscores how vital it is to involve local communities and pay the rangers fairly.
Shifting gears completely, we now move to economic structure. The aggregate export numbers for India often look good, but this analysis reveals a deepening core-periphery divide.
The finding is stark. India's export engine is powered by a narrowing cluster of states.
The top 5, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and UP now command nearly 70% of national exports.
Which is up from 65% just a few years ago. This rising concentration signals a hardening pattern where the coastal core integrates globally while the heartland gets left behind.
What's driving this concentration?
It's a global phenomenon, really. The window for low-skill, labor-intensive industrialization that lifted East Asia, it's closing.
So global capital is now drawn to what the article calls high economic complexity.
Exactly. Sophisticated manufacturing like machinery and auto components, and that naturally clusters in dense connected areas.
And this brings us to the smoking gun evidence that the link between export growth and mass employment is, well, broken.
The annual survey of industries data is pretty clear. Fixed capital investment grew at 10.6%, but employment lagged way behind at 7.4%.
The factory floor is just too capital heavy.
It is. We're talking about fixed capital per person reaching a massive 23.6 lakh rupees. We're exporting value created by machines, not creating jobs for the masses.
And the labor data confirms this. The PLFS shows manufacturing's share of employment is just stuck around 11 to 12%.
The elasticity of employment to export growth has collapsed. High GDP growth in these industrial states isn't leading to mass prosperity.
To make this more concrete, the article uses this financial MRI, credit deposit ratios.
Right, which basically tells you if local savings are being lent back out locally.
And in the export hubs like Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, the ratio is over 90%. Money stays home and gets recycled.
But the contrast is horrifying. Hinterland states like Bihar and eastern UP are below 50%.
Which illustrates a perverse form of capital flight. Savings from Bihar are, in effect, being used to fund projects on the coast.
That's the term they use. So the profound insight here is that exports are no longer a lever for structural transformation.
They're an outcome.
An outcome of prior structural capacity. States export because they are already developed enough to do so, and that challenges the whole idea of using export growth as a proxy for inclusive prosperity.
Our final deep dive brings us to political science and the surprising resurgence of pro-incumbency in Indian state elections.
Which, as you say, just flies in the face of strong anti-incumbency trends we're seeing elsewhere in the world.
Right. In the US, the UK, South Africa, you see strong anti-incumbency. But in Indian states, it's the opposite.
You only need to look at Nitish Kumar taking his oath as Bihar Chief Minister for the 10th time to see the resilience of these mandates.
And the trend is clear across the board. Governments in Bihar, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, which got its 7th straight term, have all been reelected.
And if you look historically, it's a fascinating pattern. India had strong pro-incumbency from 52 to 66. Then it flipped to strong anti-incumbency from 89 to 98, where most governments were voted out.
And now we're in a new phase of resurgence.
They're securing renewed mandates.
So what's the formula they use to absorb all that natural political discontent?
The narratives focus heavily on stability, that promise of a double-engine ki sarkar, and strong centralized leadership.
And that framework seems to rely on a critical two-part formula.
It does. First, you have welfare schemes, which are the mobilizing force for the poor and lower middle classes. They provide direct, tangible benefits.
And while that addresses the base, they simultaneously rely on
general infrastructural improvement, better roads, better urban facilities that mobilizes the upper middle class voters.
So by delivering both, they neutralize discontent across the board.
Which leads to these mandates being largely leader-centric and welfare-driven. It allows them to absorb pressures that cause a rotation of power in other democracies.
It's a really unique political countertrend.
Especially when the underlying economic structure is, as we just discussed, failing to deliver those mass jobs nationally.
So today we spanned a wide range, but the threads connect. We saw the new Viksit Act aiming to provide structural welfare, even as the traditional economic engine of exports struggles to spread inclusive employment.
And our final thought for you to consider is this. Is the increasing reliance on leader-centric welfare schemes to secure mandates in our state elections a necessary political solution to that structural problem of concentrated, capital-biased economic growth?
In other words, if exports aren't providing jobs nationally,
Then the political demand for guaranteed welfare and the political capital you get from delivering it only increases, something for you to mull or explore on your own.
thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.